Hello, welcome to this new series, Introduction to Node.js for Salesforce Developer. My name is Julian Duque. I am a lead developer advocate here at Salesforce, working with the Heroku team, and I will be your JavaScript guide in this journey. So I've been working with JavaScript and Node.js for a while. I started doing Node.js development since 2011, and I also had the opportunity to be part of their open source contributors. So I was one of their collaborators. I was able to land some pull requests on the open source project. And I also traveled to different conferences all around the world speaking about Node.js. I also organized the Node.js conference in Colombia, where I'm from, and also the JavaScript conference. Both NodeConf and JSConf had previous events when we were able to meet in real life. And right now, we are seeing if this year we can do some sort of remote event and continue promoting these technologies to all of the developer community. I wanted to bring this topic here into Trailhead Live and for the Trailblazer community because Node.js is becoming one of the most interesting JavaScript runtimes also for Salesforce developers. Right now, you can develop web applications using Lightning Web Components, both on platform and off platform using Lightning Web Components open source. And the tooling behind LWC is created using Node.js. As a Salesforce developer, you might be using the Salesforce CLI, the SFDX command to bootstrap your Salesforce projects, or you might be using the Heroku CLI, which also allows you to manage the Heroku instance and deployment for your applications. And I want to tell you that also those tools, those developer tools that we created, that we release open source, are also written using the Node.js runtime. So you are using Node.js even though you don't know that you are using it. So I just published a blog post. You can go to developer.salesforce.com/blogs, and there you can find my latest blog post, which is an introduction of Node.js and why it mattered for us as Salesforce developers. Today, I want to show you what Node.js is, how can we install Node.js on our operating systems, how can we start our first Node.js project. We are going to write a CSV to JSON parser. So we are going to read a CSV file, and then we are going to convert that file into a JSON structure. And we are going to do that by hand, just using JavaScript, and then using a module from Npm, which is the Node.js and JavaScript package ecosystem. So you are going to see how can using libraries that are published to internet by third parties can simplify the work of building Node.js and JavaScript applications. We are going to use also 3 different approaches of asynchronous programming, which is one of the most important aspects of Node.js development, and the one that it might be a little bit difficult at the beginning for people starting with Node.js. So I want to explain the different asynchronous ways to develop applications using Node.js callbacks, using promises, using Async Await, and we might be able to see a stream example. So let's hope you join me on this presentation. This is going to be the first of a series of presentations about Node.js. In the next episode, we are going to start building a web application using Lightning Web Components open source, and we will build a Node.js API, and we will deploy this application to Heroku. Then we are going to continue building the application by adding a database. So we are going to use PostgreSQL and Redis to our application. And then we will integrate this application with Salesforce Core. So we are going to see different ways of integration, integrating by using the API or integrating by using Heroku Connect. So stay tuned. This series is going to be, I expect, at least 5 episodes. So let's start. Let me get into this screen. Fantastic. So what is Node.js? The website that I have open here is the official Node.js.org website. And in the first line here, we have the full definition of Node.js. Node.js is a JavaScript runtime built on top the BA JavaScript engine from Google Chrome or from Chromium. So pretty much, JavaScript is the language of the web, is the language that is running on every web browser that you are using. Right now I'm using Google Chrome, and Google Chrome has a JavaScript engine that executes the JavaScript in my computer. But Node.js uses that same engine to execute JavaScript out of the browser. So we are going to start building applications using the language for the browser outside the browser. So that's something that it's commonly called as server-side development. That doesn't mean necessarily that we are going to be building servers. We can using Node.js, but that means that we are running JavaScript outside the browser. We are running it on the server, on the machine. So we are going to use JavaScript as the main language to execute programs. Normally, Node.js was created to build network-based applications, specifically web applications. But as of today, you can find different applications written with Node.js. APIs, web applications, desktop applications, embed applications that are running on microcontrollers. Those are also built using the same language, JavaScript, and using Node.js as their runtime. For example, to build Salesforce applications, you might be using Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is built using Node.js. This is a web application that is running as a desktop application, and this is thanks to a runtime called Electron that it's built also using Node.js. So now we are seeing that Node.js is way more than just JavaScript on the server. It also allows us to create multiple types of applications. Another type of those applications are command line tools. As you guessed, the SFDX, which is the Salesforce CLI, is also built using Node.js. So here I'm checking the version of the Salesforce CLI that I have installed on my computer, and we are seeing that internally this is using Node.js version 12. And if I do the same with the Heroku CLI tool, we can see that Heroku uses a different version of Node.js, but both tools are built using an open source framework for Node.js called Oakleaf. So you can go and check oakleaf.io, and with this framework, you will be able to create those command line tool applications. Well, this is an introduction, why it matters. Now let's go first. How can we install Node.js on our computers? So I must say, maybe the easiest way, but as developers, maybe not the recommended one, is to go to nodejs.org, and directly from nodejs.org, you have 2 different channels or release channels where you can install Node.js. One is the LTS. LTS means long-term support. This is the stable version that is recommended for production environments. And the other one is the current version, which is the latest, the one that has the latest features. It is a stable version, but not recommended for production. It is not supported or vetted by the Node.js open source team to be used on production. So if you are building a new application and you are experimenting, you can use the current one. But if you are going to push something to production, or you are going to install Node.js in a server, use the LTS version. So you can go here, click, and it will download a package that will install depending on your operating system, if it is Windows, Mac, or Linux. But we are developers, and we might need to use different versions of Node.js. Let's say I want to do my experiments using Node.js 15, and I want to write my production applications using Node.js 14. And it is better to have a version manager for this JavaScript runtime. So here at Salesforce, there are like a bunch of other developers like me that use this type of developer tools to increase productivity. And one of the latest one that has simplified the process of installing Node.js in a developer computer, it's called Volta. So Volta is a JavaScript tool manager. With this, you will be able to install multiple different JavaScript runtimes and tools that are useful for front-end and back-end development using JavaScript. And one of the runtimes you can install with Volta is Node.js. Volta, it's available also on Linux, Windows, and Mac, so you can install this in the operating system of your choice. This is how you easily install it on a Unix-based operating system like Mac or Linux. You execute this command, and then you have a new command called Volta in your computer that will allow you to install different versions of Node.js and other runtimes. So I already installed Volta. As you can see, Volta. Let me see the help. And here with Volta, I can list all of the different runtimes I have installed. So right now I have installed Node.js 14 and some other binaries that are available on this installation. I have the create LWC app command line, so we can bootstrap an LWC application using LWC open source. We have the Heroku CLI, which is, as I told you, a Node.js command line tool, and some other tools that I usually use while building web applications. So right now, Volta, with Volta install Node, it will go ahead and fetch Node.js from the internet and install it in your computer. So you will be able to use Node.js, the one that it's installed by Volta. I can also install the specific versions of Node.js. For example, I want to install the version 12. Maybe I want to build an older an application with an older version of Node.js, or I want to build an application with the current version of Node.js. I specify the version with @ and the version number, and these will fetch that specific version into my local machine, and I will be able to switch between the two. So right now, I installed the 15 version on Node.js, and that's how can you specifically install multiple versions of Node on your computer and use them using Volta. So now I'm going to pin Node at 14 because that's the one. Oh, sorry. I'm going to install Node 14 because that's the one I need. And this is the one that it is used by default. So we are good. So remember, you can install Node.js by going to the website, or a recommended way for developers is using Volta. There are many other ways to install Node.js. If you are running a Linux server, you might want to be interested in looking at the Linux binary distributions by node source, or maybe you are going to use NVM, which is the Node version manager. There are multiple ways and all of them are valid. My recommendation is to make things easier for you as developers. Go with Volta and you will have the latest and fastest experience to handle JavaScript tooling in your computer. Well, so Node.js, as I told you before, allows you to create an application that is going to be executed on your computer, not on your browser. So we can have different type of applications. One of them are going to be console applications. Applications that are going to run on a terminal, and others are going to be web applications. Applications that are going to start an HTTP server and are going to serve content. We are going to focus today on console line applications or the scripts We are not going to create any network application yet. That one is going to be for the next episode when we are going to start building a web application. But today we are going to take a look at some basics around Node.js. So one thing about Node is that Node.js is an asynchronous runtime. It is using an asynchronous language called JavaScript, and it only uses one single thread to do asynchronous operations, specifically I/O operations. I/O, or input and output operations, are those that require to, for example, read information from the file system, do a network operation, do a database query, an API call. Those are going to be considered I/O operations. Those operations are going to block, if we are not using proper asynchronous paradigms, those I/O operations are going to block the main thread, and that is not recommended on a highly concurrent application. While we are writing a console application, it is not a problem because there is only one user running that application. But when we are using Node.js as a server, a web application, multiple users might be accessing the same resource, the same runtime. And if we are blocking operations, if we are blocking what it's called the event loop, which is the mechanism that allows Node.js to execute the asynchronous operations by scheduling those, making sure that those operations are finalized by the kernel or by the process that is taking care of that I/O operation, and using events to notify the main thread that that operation has been finalized so it can continue executing the other operations. So Node.js normally is going to schedule tasks on an event loop to avoid blocking the main thread. But if you are using synchronous operations, operations that are going to block the event loop, we are going to experience performance issues while serving this application to concurrent users. So what we are going to build is an application that reads a CSV file, contact data CSV file with multiple contacts, and we will parse that file line by line. We are going to convert that file into a JSON structure, and then we are going to store that JSON structure back into disk. So here we have multiple I/O operations. The first I/O operation is to read the file from the operating system. Then we are going to go through all of the file contents, and then we are going to write the file back to the system. So we are going to see different approaches of how to do this. We are going to do it fully synchronously. So we are going to use blocking operations. Then we are going asynchronously using the callback pattern, and we are going to see what is the callback pattern in Node.js, which is the most common pattern for APIs using Node.js. And when I talk about API, I don't mean a web API. I mean the API of a library or a function. How can I use that using the default pattern in Node.js? We are going to take a look also at promises, how to turn that code using callbacks into promises, how to use native promises in Node.js, and at the end, the most modern way of dealing with asynchronous operations, which is using Async Await. Okay? So hello you all, to everybody that is in the chat right now. If you have any questions, please let me know. I am alone today. I am not with Mo or with my other teammates, so it might take some time to check out all the chat, but please, if you have any question, let me know and I will be more than happy to reply it. So are you all ready to write some Node.js applications with me? So I need you to have Node.js installed in your computer, so you saw that you can do it either by using the website or Volta. I recommend to use Volta. Also recommended if you have Visual Studio Code installed in your computer. So go ahead, install Visual Studio Code in your computer, and also make sure to install the Salesforce tools for Visual Studio. And you can also install this extension, which is the VS Code for Node.js development bulk by Node Source. You can find these on the Visual Studio Marketplace. And this is a collection of multiple extensions that are useful on Node.js development. This is the extension I always install, and it has all my preferred tools while building Node.js applications on Visual Studio Code. So Sil is asking, what is the name of the CLI framework you mentioned at the beginning? So that framework, it's called OClif, the Open CLI Framework. With this, you will be able to write command line applications. It also has plugin support, documentation support. So it's very, very easy to use. It's very complete. And this is what we use internally here at Salesforce. The Salesforce CLI is built using OClif, and the Heroku CLI is built using OClif as well. Okay, so let's start. I have a folder that contains 2 directories. This is going to be my main Node.js project. Right now, I only have one data folder that contains a CSV file. So let me show you the content of that CSV file. This is a CSV file I got from Easy Spaces, which is one of our sample gallery applications. You can go to Trailhead Apps and find these CSV or other CSVs here. So let me show you where you can get this file. You can go to Trailhead Apps, Easy Spaces LWC. In the data folder, I am using the same contact data.csv. So what I want to do is read this file and convert this file to JSON. And we also have, let me open this in Visual Studio Code. We also have a test folder. Inside the test folder, we have a fixtures folder, and we have the result, what we expect. So we are going to also write a test case for the function that is going to convert this CSV file into this JSON structure. So this is the input, and this is going to be the output. Initially, we are going to use just JavaScript and the Node.js basic APIs to do this. And later, we are going to use a module from Npm. Npm is the package registry for Node.js. We are going to see how other developers might have developed a library or utility that solves that issue for me. So I don't need to write a parser from scratch, just use what it is available on the ecosystem. Okay, perfect. So first and foremost, any Node.js project, the recommended way to start is by creating a package.json. The package.json is a metadata file, a descriptor file of your Node.js project. So it's going to contain the name, a description, the version of your Node.js project, and might contain also the dependencies and dev dependencies that this application uses. So how can we create a package.json file? By running npm init. npm, as I told you, is the package manager for Node.js and JavaScript. And with npm init, it starts a wizard that asks us for some information about our project. So npm init, it asks for the name. The name is going to be intro to Node.js. The version 1, the description, CSV parser, a CSV to JSON parser. The entry point, my entry point, let's call it index.js, why not? A test command, I don't have any tests right now, so we will add tests later. The Git repository, I don't have this in Git, but I might be able to do it. So let's see, I'm going to put this later after we finish this into Trailhead intro Node.js. So this is where it's going to live on my GitHub on Trailhead intro to Node.js. And the author, it's going to be me. This is going to be me and the license. So right now the file looks good. I click on enter and now I have a package JSON. The package JSON, as I told you, it just has some some metadata and description of your application and might contain the dependencies and dev dependencies. But we are not going to deal with dependencies right now. I'm going to show you what we can use. We are going to use core modules, which are going to be the modules that are available in the basic installation of Node.js, or maybe the standard library of Node.js, if we can call it that way. And then we are going to see how can we create a module. So we are going to create a module that is going to take care of that CSV parsing. And then we are going to use third-party modules, which let us fetch packages from internet using npm and use those packages to solve the issue. So now that we have the package JSON, we are going to create the index.js file. So here on the index.js file, we are going to start solving the issue. So first, we need to read a CSV file from the file system. How can we read information from the file system? So if we go to the Node.js website, go to documentation, let's pick the version we are using, the 14. We have different sections that are basically covering the core modules, the modules that comes by default on Node.js. Here we can see that we have a file system module. We also have other modules like the child process if you want to execute commands on your computer, or the HTTP if you want to create an HTTP server or HTTP client from your computer. The crypto if you are doing crypto operations like hashing and encrypting. So there are like different modules that you can use. We are going to use two: the file system and the path. File system has different functions to interact with the file system, like reading or writing files, checking the permissions of a file, listing directories, etc. And path are path utilities, pretty much to create paths on a cross-platform environment. Many of you know that paths can be created differently if you are on a Linux or Unix environment or on a Windows environment. So the path utility is going to be very useful to create those paths. So how did I create a Node project in Visual Studio Code? I just created a folder. There is no specific template for a Node.js project. I created a folder, and inside that folder, I executed npm init. So that's what I did. I created a folder and then I executed npm init. That is considered a Node.js project. Then I open it with Visual Studio Code and I'm working on it. There is no like a specific template to create a Node.js project on Visual Studio Code. Okay, so we have the file and now we need the modules. So Node.js by default uses a module convention called CommonJS. CommonJS, it's a little bit different than ECMAScript modules while reading modules, because instead of using the import, it uses the require function to read modules. So how it works, I am going to assign into a variable, which is a constant, and I'm using a constant here because the value of fs cannot change. It is a module. It's equals, and I am going to require the name of the module. And the name of the module is going to be fs. How do I know this? By reading the documentation. The documentation tells us the name of the module and examples on how can we start working with this specific module. So we have synchronous examples, how to use callbacks, and I'm going through these examples while reading that CSV file. Okay, now we imported this module. You can also take a look at the different methods that a module has by running the Node REPL. So the REPL is the read, eval, print loop. Is going to be the pretty much the command line tool for Node.js. I can like quickly type JavaScript instructions in this REPL. This is similar to the console in a web browser here, where I can add let's say a variable and print that variable. In the console from Chrome Developer Tools, I can do the same here in the REPL. So I am creating a variable and I'm printing that variable using console log, and it also going to evaluate JavaScript here in the REPL. So the REPL is also a very good way to test quick JavaScript statements or instructions. So another way to check for methods available in a module is to use the REPL. Let's say I want to check the FS module, dot, and then I use tab to autocomplete. So when I use tab to autocomplete, it's going to list all of the different methods and properties that are added to this module. And from here, I can check, for example, the different read functions that I might be able to use. So we see here that we have read file and read file sync. So we are going to read the file synchronously. That means we are blocking the event loop, not recommended for production or for web applications, for example. But for this purpose, we can use it. And the other one is read file, which is asynchronous. And we're going to see the difference. The other module we are going to use is the path. So path has certain utilities that are going to allow us to create a folder and file names using a cross-platform utility. For example, join, let's join the data folder with the contacts data.csv file, and what it does simply concatenates the information safely. If we were on Windows, the slash is going to be turned into a backslash or the equivalent. Or if we do resolve, it's going to resolve that information, but on the fully qualified path. So depending on what you need to do, path join or path resolve might be useful for you to create those file names, because we are going to read this file from the script. Okay, so we are also going to use path to do path operations. Then let's create the file name. The file name is going to be path resolve, the dist directory, and contacts data.csv. So that's going to be the file name we are going to read. And then we can read the file using the read file sync. So read file sync is going to read the file on a synchronous way. And what that means is that I can return directly from the function the value I am expecting. So I am waiting until this function finalizes and I am getting the result. So here, as the first argument, I pass the file name. As a second argument, I pass the encoding, because otherwise it will read a buffer like a binary file, and I want it to parse it like a string. So let's encode it, use UTF-8, and then I will print the contents of that file. So I am reading the file, assigning the file into a variable, and then printing out the content of the file. How to execute that script? By using Node and the name of the file, the name of the index or the JavaScript file we created. So when we execute this, we have an issue. This is wonderful. And I'm going to show you what happened. We had an error because the file does not exist. And if somebody in the chat was paying attention, it can help me. Hey, Julian, you had a typo. You wrote this, but the folder is called data. So see, I tried to read a file and it crashed. So I had a terrible error in here. This error is not being managed. I'm not using a try catch or some sort of mechanism to handle this error. So we need to do it, especially when dealing with synchronous and asynchronous methods. But now that the path is good, let's try it again. And it is contact data. I'm going to execute, and now it works. So I'm reading the file, and after reading the file, I'm printing out the content of that file. So this is synchronous, and what I'm doing here is while reading this file, I am blocking the main thread until that operation finishes, and I get the result. If I'm doing this on a website, like if this is a parse CSV on a website and there are like 100 users calling this function, my server is going down. My server is going to be super slow because I am blocking the event loop. I am blocking the main thread of the application. So we need to avoid that by writing asynchronous functions. So how can we read this file using an asynchronous function? So the syntax changed a little bit. So now, an asynchronous function doesn't return any value. In this case, the value is going to be passed. It uses continue passing or continuation passing pattern. It's going to pass the value to a callback. And what is a callback? A callback is a function that is going to be executed later. It's going to be executed after the reading event finalizes. So when I'm using a synchronous function, and this is the synchronous function here, read file, I'm scheduling this operation on the event loop. The event loop is going to read that information, and when it finishes, it's going to trigger an event. That event is going to execute the callback. And what is a callback? The callback is a function that it's executed usually as the last argument of any synchronous function. So it is a function that receives the error as the first argument, and then it might receive the value sometimes if a function returns a value as the second argument. So here inside this function is where I have the file. Not outside, inside. So now you might be seeing something a little bit more complex. What if I have multiple function calls that are nested? I will be writing functions inside functions inside functions. And that's what people call the callback hell or the pyramid of doom or some other names in the JavaScript ecosystem. And sure, those can be a little bit annoying, but there are like other types of asynchronous structures that can help us come with better solutions. So how can we read this information? So we always need to check for errors. If there is an error, we are going to print the error, and we are going to exit the process with code 1. And if there is no an error, I'm going to print the file. So let's see, no errors, it works. If there is an error, let's change the path. Now I am printing the error that I capture on this if-err statement. So this is the callback pattern. So I am passing a function at the end of the synchronous operation that is going to receive the value once that operation finishes. Most of the Node.js libraries and APIs also use the callback pattern, and this is why I recommended to learn it first, even though Async Await and promises is way more popular and way more modern. There are a lot of documentation, a lot of modules that still uses the callback pattern. You can convert from callback pattern to a promise which is the next structure we are going to take a look in next, which is a better way to handle asynchronous operations. So let's convert the read file into a promise. So Node.js has a function called promisify that it's available on the util module. So let's go to the documentation, util module, or utilities, and here we have the promisify. So the promisify converts a function that it's written using callbacks into a function that returns promises. So we can do something like read file equals promisify fs read file. So we are getting the original read file and creating a new function, but this function speaks using promises. So how it works. So now I have the read file function, and then I need to get the value or to resolve the promise. So to resolve the promise, I need to pass the then function, and then we'll have a callback. So I'm still using callbacks, but using a different paradigm. And in this callback, I'm going to print the file contents. And I also have another like another way to capture the errors or to manage the errors by using the catch. And here I also pass another function to print that error. Okay. So right now it is failing and I'm using promises. So it is failing. And if I fix the path, now it works. So I was able to turn something that was using callbacks into something that is using promises. And now promises might be a little bit more modern and easier to use. But you can also use Async Await. So let's go and take a look at Async Await. So Async Await lets you write a synchronous operation with functions that return promises in a kind of synchronous way. So let's create an asynchronous function. Let's call this function main. And here I can do something like file await read file, the file name UTF-8, and print the file. So I reduce this what it called the tenable. Instead of passing a function, I am awaiting until that function finishes to get the result. So I can still use some sort of a synchronous model, but writing asynchronous functions. And this is not going to block the event loop. If I'm writing this type of codes on a web server, I am not blocking the event loop, and I will be able to have a lot of concurrent users requesting the same resource, happy, because they are not going to experience performance issues. And how can we manage errors in here? By using the try catch. So Async Await uses try catch to be able to capture any type of error. So for people that it's more experienced, for example, in Java or Apex, these might be way more familiar to you. You are using try catch, you are executing functions that are like pretty much synchronous looking, even though they are going to be asynchronous, and the result is going to be as expected. So here, let's execute the main function, which is an asynchronous function. You can only use await within an asynchronous function. If I remove this async, this function is going to fail. I need to keep it asynchronously. So if I execute, the code is working as expected. So now we saw like the three different ways how can we read this file, how can we execute this file by writing it on a synchronous way, a synchronous way using callbacks. We saw how to execute it by using promises, and now using Async Await. Remember, Async Await is a syntax sugar on top of promises, so you are going to be using promises as well. Now we need to parse this file, so we convert this CSV into a JSON structure. So how can we do this? So first, we will need to get the headers, right? And then those headers needs to be mapped with the values, and we will need to go through all of the different files or lines in the CSV. So let's first create an array of the file by lines. So I'm splitting that array. I'm using the split operation over a string to create an array. And a split is using the new line operator to create an array with the multiple lines of my CSV file. Then I'm going to iterate over my file. I'm doing a for each. I have here the line, and I'm using an arrow function here. So I have the line and I have the index. So the index, every time I execute for each, I'm going to get the line where I am, and then I'm going to get the index of that line. Something like this, console log, index, and line. So if I execute this, now we see every line. So the line 0 contains the header, and the other lines contain the records that I wanna extract. So let's get an array with records, and let's continue. So if the line is the 0, like the index 0, I will extract the headers. I need the headers. So let's create a headers array. I'm going to use let here because I will replace this value. If it were const, it was going to fail. So let me do headers. It's equal at that line, but I'm splitting the line by comma. So I'm getting all of the different positions in an array. And I will exit the function. So this arrow function, I will exit in order to don't continue parsing on the next line. And then now that I have the headers, what I'm going to do is to create an object. So here is going to be the record, which is an object, and I'm going to iterate over the headers with the index as well. And what I'm doing is the rest. Now I need the values, so let's get the values. It's going to be the line split by comma. So those are going to be now the values that I'm going to be mapping in this new object. And now what I do is the header, I'm adding the value that correspond to that specific index. And at the end, when I created the record, I'm going to push the record inside the records list. So I'm doing an operation, converting the CSV into a JSON file. And at the end, let's print as a string that records file and see if it works. Now let's hope this works, and there you go. Now we converted from a CSV file to a JSON structure using JavaScript. So we will need to write this file into disk, or maybe create a module, create a module that we can test, that we can see if this is working as expected. So how can we turn this into a module? I'm going to show you. So let's rename this function to something called CSV to JSON, and it will receive the file name as an argument. So now we are receiving the file name as an argument. And how can we turn this into a module? We are going to export that function, module.export CSV to JSON. So now this code that we created, it is a module that instead of printing out this string, is going to return the string, is going to return the value. Let's keep it as a JavaScript object instead of a JSON. So just return the array. And if there is an error, well, let's return empty. So I'm returning empty if there is an error, and I'm returning the fully parsed version if it worked. And now quickly, let's write a test. So I'm going to install a dev dependency called tab. Tab is a test runner, a very simple test runner for Node.js. This is being saved as a save dependency, as a dev dependency, sorry. So this is a dependency that is not needed on production. This is needed just for development purposes. Now it is on the package JSON, as you can see. We have tab as a dev dependency, and then I'm going to change the test script to execute tab. So when I run npm test, it will run my tests. Right now, I don't have any test, so let's write our first test. Let's go to the test folder, new file, csv to json.test.js, and let import tab, and import the module we are going to test, which lives on the previous folder, index.js, and then tab test, it should parse. Let me see if I can do it in 3 minutes. Let's load the parsed one. We can require JSON files by using require. So we can require from the fixtures the JSON file. And what are we going to do is execute csv.json. So we need the path here. Execute csv.json asynchronously. So let me pass this as an asynchronous function. And let's see if it works. So result await CSV to JSON. Let's add the file name. So it's going to be data contact data.csv. And let's see if it works. T must be the same. The parsed, it needs to be the same as the result. So let's see if our test worked. Let's execute. It's going to check, and boom, our test passed. The csv.json module we created, it is parsing the data as expected. So today we were able how to do it by hand. On the next episode, we are going to start how can we simplify that process by using the CSV Parser. The CSV Parser is a library that lives on NPM, so we don't need to write all that parsing logic by hand. It's going to be way easier to parse the information. And then we will start building our web application using Node.js and Lightning Web Components. Don't miss that session, and I hope you like this one and stay tuned with me for more introduction to Node.js for Salesforce developers content. Thank you very much for joining me, and catch this recording on our YouTube channel. See ya on the next one. Bye bye, and thank you very much.